All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Don Sexton, and I'm going to talk to you for about the next hour about our competency training and competency development. And this is an important part of your guys' responsibilities as preceptors as an extension of our program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over what competencies are first, and then I'm going to get into how we use the competency models within our classroom for didactic training. And then I'm going to talk about how you can use them when you're with your residents as a preceptor. So before I start into this, I wanted to get an idea if everybody understood this concept of uncertainty. You guys understand what uncertainty would entail or what it means? Absolutely. Uncertainty, right. How about ambiguity is another term that ambiguity. So when you, okay, and then clarity would be probably the highest level or what we try to achieve, right? So uncertainty, as I like to describe it, would be like a void of information. It's like a blank slate, meaning you don't even know what's happening or you don't know a concept, right? And so if you see things in our hospital, as an example, you may not even know that something is happening because you're totally uncertain about it, right? And so when I would imagine everybody in here is familiar with competencies within our hospitals, correct? And so it's important for us to understand these concepts because if somebody is truly uncertain, let's say it's a front desk person at our hospital, right, or in a clinic. If they see somebody fall over in the clinic and they don't know how to respond, they're uncertain, that could be a dangerous situation, right? So they don't know how to respond, so there's this gap in knowledge. So when you get to points of ambiguity, usually there's multiple meanings for a point when we talk about ambiguity, right? And we can often talk through ambiguity in the classroom or in the work environment, and that will help us to ascend to this point of clarity, right? This clear, concise picture of what's going on. So the reason why I like to frame this conversation around that is because our competencies, we should understand them in that way. So if we have a total blank canvas and something happens, we don't have competencies, then we could potentially have bad outcomes. And that's why within our facilities we have competency training, we have competency folders to manage how we train and we hire our staff, right? So I'm going to first start off with our program is actually accredited through CAMI, and this accreditation agency actually requires our program to have competency-based training. So one of the criteria is that we establish a way to measure and assess our competencies over time. And we've actually done extremely well in this. We're one of the top programs in the country with competency-based training for our didactic and our residency training. So I'm going to show you the way that we have organized to achieve this kind of pinnacle of excellence in terms of graduate management education. But before we get into that, I wanted to kind of go through competencies so we're all on the same sheet of music. Again, trying to ascend to this point of clarity, right? So most of you probably understand what competencies are, right? Yes or no? Have you heard of skills, knowledge, and abilities, SKAs? You probably have heard of those in human resources terms. Bloom's taxonomy actually has 3 domains of competencies, and those are, as you can see here, skills, knowledge, and attitudes. And so if you think about skills, that would be your psychomotor skills, your actual movement. So if you think about a surgeon has to have skills and they have cutting skills, and so there's a requirement to have competencies in their actual psychomotor skills. Cognitive skills are the knowledge that you would have within the workplace, and the affective or attitude skill or attitude domain would focus on your values and attitudes towards specific tasks. So if you think about these competencies, these are what's required in the workplace essentially. And so we often define them in the workplace, so every role should have skills, knowledge, and attitudes required of the role, right? And when you hire people, you're often hiring them towards that, or you're training them up so they have the right skills, knowledge, and attitudes is the idea behind this. So you can actually do a competency assessment based on these known skills, knowledge, and attitudes is the idea. So we focus on Bloom's taxonomy. This is often used in educational institutions. So it's a pyramid structure, as you can see. So this one in particular is the cognitive domain. So the cognitive domain, what we're focusing on is the intellectual or mental skills, right? So what does a person know about the specific tasks that are required of them? This uses action words to help describe, how you would learn. And so if you look at this, essentially this is a way to organize, to try to get a person to move to these points of clarity. But these action words right here will help in terms of these cognitive processes. So if you move from the bottom to the top, it goes from very low-level skills like just remembering requirements or remembering tasks. Like this could be define, the 8 steps of a tort claim or something like that. That's as simple as it gets. So you're just remembering it. And then as you start to move up, you get into these higher level cognitive requirements, right? And so you get into understand and apply. And so you can see here that there's different levels of learning. And so again, in terms of education, if you get into these higher levels of learning, you're really maximizing these cognitive processes. And so the reason why this is important to understand is this is, again, how we're doing our assessments too. And so you can use this in terms of learning, and you can use it in terms of assessing. And this is an example of how you could use it as an assessment. And so we're going to go through our orals board tomorrow with our students that are finishing the didactic year, and we're going to be able to assess them on different dimensions of competencies. And so these examples right here are a perfect way that you can actually assess a student. So the top question on this focuses on the application of competencies with regards to quality improvement. And so if you think about the application part right here, this would suggest that you're asking them with regards to a certain situation, how would you assess the situation, what frameworks would you apply, and what you're looking for is their ability to pull out the important information and apply the right framework or the tools towards the situation itself. And so that's how you can assess somebody at a higher level of competency. At the lower level of competency, you would ask them just list and describe, say, for example, the Lean Six Sigma framework. And so they would say DMAIC, and you would have them define exactly what that is. And so you could assess them on both levels and assess if they can actually apply it to the situation or if they have a lower level of competency. And so I would imagine that everybody's used something similar to this when you're interviewing somebody for a job. You probably ask them what they know, or if they were in a certain situation, how would they respond to it. So that's, again, how we'd use this in a very practical way. So is there any questions on this before we move forward? So this is a great way to kind of conceptualize, how we're going to do, business together in terms of our didactic training and how you guys as preceptors can help to develop competencies during their residency year. So our program, the competencies were developed from the Joint Medical Executive Skills Institute, and this was a federal requirement or a congressional requirement from the mid-90s. And what they required was the military health system, they wanted to have competencies for our senior executives, these core competencies that each executive should have in order to be a senior executive within the military health system. And so what they did was they got together with work groups from the Department of Defense, and they essentially queried all these leaders to find out what competencies our executives should have. And this has gone through 8 iterations now. I believe they're in the 9th iteration this week. We have a couple of executives that are there helping. But that's the kind of history of this. So it's a product that's been built over time. So we use it, and there are 7 different domains that they've developed in terms of competencies. So this actually shows them in a little bit more detail. So the 7 domains of competencies are listed. These are the different domains. And then these are the competencies that are grouped under that domain. So as an example, our military medical competencies, those would be specific competencies that we're required to have with regards to force management, emergency responses, those types of medical missions that we have in particular to the Department of Defense. We've got leadership and organizational management competencies. That's with regards to strategic planning, operational planning, leadership and change management. We've got health law and policy competencies. Those are centered on, obviously, health law, health resources allocation. That focuses on financial management and human resources and logistics, those types of resource management. We have ethics that focuses on bioethics and organizational ethics. We've got individual and org behavior competencies under that domain. That would be individual and teams and how we manage them. And then the last area is performance measurement and improvement, and that would be quality, safety, those types of specific competencies. Are there any questions on the 7 domains and the 35 competencies? So it may seem overwhelming. There's a lot of them, and we do have a manual that we're providing to you. What I'd do is I'd recommend that you just look through it so you're familiar with them, because it'll be extremely important that you understand which of these areas the students can focus on to help develop their competencies. Yes, ma'am.
What other military schools or training use the same competency model?
That's a good question.
What other military training programs, whether they're Army, Navy, Air Force, DoD, or others, use this competency structure?
Yep, the Executive Skills Institute. So really at one point in time, the Executive Skills was monitoring all the different courses that an individual across all the services, and actually saying that if you took this course, you'd get credit for these competencies. That's kind of dropped off, but these competencies are embedded into multiple courses. I mean, Executive Skills is one example, but there are several skills. So there is an entire institute, as Dr. Sexton talked about, that the whole sole purpose is to develop these competencies and find out how to disseminate them and integrate them into the joint services.
And for those unfamiliar, the Executive Skills course is before taking over one of the senior deputy positions in our military treatment facilities. Once they're selected, they come here in advance to go through an intensive program. I don't know the exact number of days, 7 or 10 days.
It's 2 weeks now. They expanded it. Right.
And then get that opportunity to interact with each other and gain those additional competencies before taking their positions.
Yeah, this competency model is probably one of the most robust in terms of healthcare management schools or graduate schools. And you can see there's quite a bit of areas, it ranges in a pretty broad spectrum of competencies. So, but if you were to use this in terms of at a hospital level, you could actually use this to develop competencies specific towards your senior healthcare executives. And that's, again, a requirement for the Joint Commission, is to evaluate your healthcare executives and their competencies. So,
and just to kind of reiterate, we've got this competency model, again, as Dr. Sexton said, it's in its 8th edition. It's going to be in the 9th edition. They're meeting in a room right now, actually senior military healthcare leaders that have been chief operating officers, commanders, to actually develop the 9th edition. And so they go line by line for every competency and every behavior statement, and they see, are these the most current that are contemporary competencies that have application for our senior leaders. So we feel very fortunate because there's an external body that comes with funding that allows that kind of refresh of the competency model every 3 years. And so most competency models that other programs use, they don't really have that. And so we feel very fortunate to have this institute.
Of course, I would hope that taking a look at these competencies in light of where we're going to really go through a fundamental change in our military health system.
Right.
And I'm hoping that really look reading ahead into, let's just go back to SKAs for a second. Right now there's a requirement for a lot of these readiness skills, and they started with the expeditionary surgeons. Everybody's sort of tracking, are anybody even aware of that? Building this expeditionary surgeon skill set that's going to start driving readiness requirements, and they're going to start moving into other clinical competencies to do exactly the same thing. Probably orthopedics will be next. But between that and other aspects of what's in NDA 17, it's a fundamental change, and it's right on our doorstep. And it's going to require a different set of skill sets, frankly. And when I look there, I don't see much in the way of really looking at how we have an integrated healthcare delivery system, because it's not going to be what we've grown up with as a DCA. Dan and I were just talking about that because he's living the dream today. Where emissions are going to sort of evolve into, what are they going to become? Because that's right now a major food fight between the services, health affairs, the DHA, joint staff, as we struggle with all the changes in NDA. But I really think it's a fundamental shift in the skill sets that we're going to need in the future. And I just hope they're taking that into consideration.
So just to let you know, so both Alan and I were there. They actually have staffers from the Defense Health Agency that are there, and individuals that have been working on these task forces to actually to implement NDAA. And so a lot of that input is brought in. There was a suggestion actually at one point in time to actually defer that meeting for a year after NDAA stuff comes out, but they're going ahead as planned. But some of those considerations, the big question is, we don't quite know what's going to look like, and so they're trying to incorporate as much as they do.
16 months is coming quick.
Well, I do think if you've got integrated healthcare system, so, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that covers a portion of it. And I think it's going to grow in importance.
Good conversation. Or is there any questions on this? I agree. I think that's exactly why they're trying to update this. I do think it's a strength. If you guys look through it, please let us know if you have any questions. I wanted to put up here one of the specific competency areas, and this one's related to quality management and performance improvement. And so if you look at your actual GEMC guide, it will have each one of these spelled out for the competency area. It'll tell you just kind of a brief overview of what this competency encompasses. And then it gives you an example of what an executive should be doing in terms of their knowledge or behaviors to be able to show that they're competent in this area. And so in terms of this one, I highlighted on here, employ tools and techniques for decision making. Again, this if they were able to display that they could use Lean Six Sigma methods as an example, would be a great way to be able to evaluate somebody with regards to this competency. Are there any questions on this? Again, if you look through it, it may seem ambiguous. If you look through them, though, it kind of gives you an example of what specifically that competency area is. So the way we use this in our program is we look at each of the competency areas, and we sit down and we go through the competencies and we try to map them to each one of our courses, essentially. And so we have a pre and a post didactic exam that we use to also measure whether we're developing the competencies across those 35 areas. We have an actual GEMC exam. If I remember, it's 180 questions. And so it's a very robust exam. And so we can see if we're actually increasing their competencies across each of the 7 domains and down to the individual competency areas. And so it's helped us to actually evaluate our curriculum to see if we need to improve in specific areas. So this cycle essentially helps us to move through that to strengthen our program. So we're continually looking at it. Every year we look at it and we do that crosswalk to make sure that we're covering all the competencies and to see if we're actually deficient in any of the areas.
I thought it was really fantastic how for speakers coming in, we crosswalk them to see where some of our gaps were. So as we planned for the year, some of the courses, some of the competencies that we didn't hit and over in the courses, we try to coordinate for experts to come in as our speakers for the programs.
Yeah. And we, for each course in our syllabus, we actually have the competencies that every course will cover. And down to each session that we have, we'll have core competencies that are covered within each session. So the students can reflect upon them when they're studying for their orals board, as an example. And then we bubble that up, I guess you could say, to make sure that we're assessing, or we're developing competencies across all the different syllabi, or the different courses. So this is an example of the BEAR. The BEAR is the Baylor Experience Assessment Report, and you guys are going to be very familiar with the BEAR as a preceptor. But I wanted to show you on our end in terms of the didactic year. This is, again, it shows you, this is the pre-GEMC assessment. And so if you're in the knowledge range, you're a 1 to 4 assessment. That's, if you remember back to those different, in the Bloom's taxonomy, that pyramid. So if you're down at the lower levels of competency, that's a score of 1 to 4, that's the knowledge level. If you're at the assessment level, that's 5, 6, and 7. And then if you're an expert, that's above that. So it's 8 and 9. So just to kind of familiarize you with this, every student will have one of these when they come to you as a resident. The new students that we just received this week will start this actually when they start their didactic training. They'll do these, the assessment, they'll have to take the GEMC exam before we start our didactic year. And then for every course that they have, these are the courses and the competencies that are mapped to it. They will actually do a self-assessment on there, and they'll evaluate themselves where they think they're at with regards to those competencies. And this is done after the courses have been completed. And so each one of these courses, by the time they come to you, every course or every competency area will actually have a score. It'll have their own self-assessment score on there. And so you'll be able to see where their strengths and weaknesses are essentially based on their self-assessment. And so we can pull up an actual bear and show you what the full spreadsheet looks like. With this, I just wanted to show you as an example. This is how we use this tool throughout the didactic year. And so as an advisor, I'll sit down with my students once a quarter after they finish the semester, and we'll review their bear, and they'll talk to me about their strengths and weaknesses and what they learned from the class. And I'll also have them write a summary of what they learned in the class. So again, they remember those kind of high points, kind of like a mind map, but it helps them to remember those big ticket items that they learned throughout the class. So it'll help them to study for their orals board at the end. Are there any questions on this? I wanted to highlight too that we do have some target competencies with regards to the courses. Some of them we try to get to the application level, and some of them are just at the knowledge level.
You had a question?
Yes, sir.
Is this a purely development tool, or can they run into academic trouble based on?
No, this is purely a development tool. Yeah. So so we just try to work with them and use it and say, if you've got weaknesses in certain areas, we can try to strengthen it. And that's truly how it should be when they get to their residency site. You should use this as truly a developmental tool, so that way they can work with you and say, hey, you've got to work on, say, medical staff bylaws as an example. Maybe they haven't been exposed to that. And so you can strengthen those competencies by getting them involved in maybe the work group that oversees that.
I mean, that's a great point. I mean, I think even as you go through, and as Dr. Sexton go through these slides, when you look at it, you can shoot a lot of holes right into this, why the student's self-assessing, how the exams, and so that from a competency assessment, perspective, what we're trying to do is kind of triangulate. So we're looking at multiple ways to assess their competency. But the more important thing is, and to get to Ian's point, is that this should serve just as a launching point for a conversation with the student. And it's really, they're looking at this, identifying, so what we're trying to push to our students, and we've already oriented the new students as well as the old, is to be as brutally honest as you can with this tool. Because really what this is for your own development to move forward. We're not grading them on it, so this is not tied to their GPA. It's really, really intended there to serve as a conversation piece to seeing, of these 35 competencies, what are the areas that you're really good at? What are the areas that you need work on? And let's push you towards projects and rotations that'll get you the experience to enhance your competency in that specific area. And so that's a great point. This is non-attributional, right? So they're not going to get punished if at the end of the time they don't hit a certain level. What we really want is this to be a conversation piece.
Absolutely. Good question, though.
In just a second, and just to kind of hit on what Forrest was talking about before, you should be recognized as an SME to hit that 8, 9, 10. So it's not every student gets a blue ribbon, right? It's, right. We're looking at.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And then, so I've had conversations with my students too. If they've ranked themselves high in certain areas, I'll start the conversation and ask them, why they rated themselves high, or if they rated themselves low. Just to, it's a conversation starter. And then you'll see. It's color coded too. You can obviously see where there's a gap area. But that's really what this is for. It's to just help them to develop their competencies in a non-punitive way, so they can become a healthcare executive of the future, right? So we can develop them across the spectrum. And so I'm going to show you here in a minute when I get into your responsibilities or how you can leverage this to kind of focus on different projects that they can use to develop this.
Don, can I just make
Yeah, go ahead.
point? The other thing that's not uncommon is a student will come in and they'll assess themselves higher coming into the program at the beginning, be exposed to some content, and then assess themselves lower. Yeah. Because the students don't know what they don't know. And so they come in and they think they're an expert in an area, and they sit in the class and they realize, boy, I really didn't know this subject as well as I thought. And so again, again, these can change, and we're hoping that, again, that
Yeah.
the students will reflect on their competency development.
Yep. Yes, sir.
So just a quick question. As a preceptor, we should be inspecting this by when? So we could do the appropriate plan for our resident?
Yeah, so when they arrive, they'll have their own bear. So they'll have it's their own individual, assessment throughout the didactic year. And so when they arrive as a resident, they should provide this to you during your first conversation.
So as a preceptor, is there a way we could get this ahead of time so we could make the appropriate coordination on that? I'm more of a planner, so.
So what I'll do, sir, is I can email you the product so that you can see what it looks like. But since it is the student's self-assessment, they will show it to you. And it is the student's responsibility to submit the completed bear on a quarterly basis. This is after they sit with you and discuss where they're at, and you kind of QC it and say, yep, you're tracking. At the end of the year, that's probably the most valuable because we're going to ask you to also assess the student on their competencies. So I will email you the products that you can see it, get familiar with it, but it is the student's responsibility to share it with you during conversations and certainly on a quarterly basis or as they work the project.
So respectfully, ma'am,
Yes, sir.
I acknowledge, but like for my resident, I would love to know his bear. So
sure.
that first weeks when he's boots on the ground after in processing, I could do the assessment and plan accordingly based on areas of improvement and continue that process.
I will send you this
And
personal.
as advisors, we're doing one final update after the orals on Friday with the students next week. So that would be the perfect time then for them to go ahead and send it out to you is after that process. Because they just took their final jump seat test, and so those will help evaluate them, and then they're doing their final assessment next week and talk it through with the advisors.
Go ahead.
What you're saying is ask the student to submit their bear to us if we would like to see it in advance of their arrival.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
The owner of that bear.
I just have one more point because I think it is very important, but I think that the real great thing with the competencies is, again, it's external stakeholders who are defining these competencies. And this is because historically, just because our students potentially had straight A's or a 4.0 did not necessarily translate into successful healthcare administrators. And so this is the way where we like to leverage you all in the field and our external stakeholders to say, how do we develop folks to be great healthcare executives? We can assess them on how well they are at tests and some of the academic stuff, but this is what completes our program to make them great academics and great healthcare administrators.
And their orals board tomorrow, their answers are evaluated based on these competencies that's that keystone event for them to go through.
Yeah. So as Forrest said, there's a couple touch points where we're doing both subjective and objective evaluations of their competencies. And so a lot of this is very subjective based on what their kind of thoughts are with regards to the competency area. The tests that we provide, again, they're supposed to be a little bit more objective across the domains. You'll get a chance to see that. And then the orals board tomorrow, what we do is we do an average score across the 5 people on the board, and then we'll provide the student that. So they'll populate those 5 or the 7 domains. So you get a chance to see it. It's a great tool to just, again, drive the conversation. And it should be just continually worked on, just like any other competency product that you've used. As they do projects, I would recommend that you meet with them at least weekly and have them write up what they learned throughout the week and any projects that they're working on. So that's a good segue in terms of what the requirements are of you on your end. So how many of you have had a resident already? Okay, looks like about half of everybody. Okay, so the residency requirements, oftentimes our students or our residents will focus solely on their projects. So I wanted to just start right now and say there's a couple of different requirements for their residency. So there's a formal portfolio that they're required to submit at the end of the year. In their portfolio, they're required to do 3 projects and they're develop 1 best practice. The 3 projects are essentially an executive summary. It's a 3-page executive summary of a major project that they've done. For an example, they could do a process improvement or a quality improvement project. They essentially write it up, and it should focus on strengthening their competencies with regards to their bear. And so they're required to actually list which competencies they're targeting when they do the project. And so on your end, you can help by trying to assess where they're weak in their competencies and develop projects or help to kind of guide them to get projects that will broaden their aperture, if you will, or broaden their competency development. And so that's one thing that you guys need to be focused on, is just looking at it and providing those opportunities. The second piece of our residency is the actual going out and shadowing essentially the staff in the workplace. And this is often put by the wayside because our students are so focused on the projects, right? So you don't want to overburden them with too many projects. What I've seen is students will do their 3 projects, but then they'll also do a bunch of mini projects. And although it's great because you get to that application level of competency development, what you sacrifice is their ability to see the system of healthcare, right? And so on this side, the residency rotations, what you should do is figure out where they need to go throughout the hospital. Like when I was on my administrative residency, I went to every single place in the hospital, and I sat down with the leaders that were managing that area, and we talked about their mission and how they provided care. We linked it to the overall organization, and then I stayed and shadowed the actual people in the workplace just to get a kind of a feel for, you know, how they organized to support the organization. So if you think about when I started out with this level of uncertainty and then ambiguity, if you can get them out there and they can start to see what's happening and interface with people, you're going to start to close those gaps in terms of how the healthcare system functions, right? And so again, this is often where we sacrifice because our students just want to sit in the office and work on their portfolio projects. So I'd tell you, just to balance that out, they do have to finish their requirements for a project, but you really need to force them to get out and see things. And that's how every one of you as a preceptor can really help to develop them as a future executive, is opening the doors. They need sponsors. They need somebody that can say, you're going to go here, you're going to get access to the executive board, you're going to get access to the CFO, you're going to get access to everything, right? And so that was one thing that really helped me as an administrative resident. Was the chief of staff said, you know, if Don comes out there, it's equivalent to me coming out. And so you'll treat him as if I came out. So that's what I would recommend to you all, is just try to get them access, try to balance this out. And they'll develop their residency plan when they first hit the ground. They'll develop the year, and it'll be, again, kind of a work in progress. As you know, you see what their competency needs are, and as opportunities come up, you'll have a chance to help develop that. Are there any questions on this? Yeah, I can't stress this enough. This is one of the important pieces that you have to have in terms of concept, is they've got to balance both sides. So this one really helps to broaden the system's perspective. And what we often see is our students or our residents will go into a single department, and they don't vary very far from there, and then they don't get that kind of systems approach to how to run a hospital.
Sorry, did you want to talk to the required rotations at all?
Okay. All right. Are there any questions on this? I would recommend, there is a spot in their bear where they have to, they should be writing up their rotations. But what would make it successful is if you met with them weekly as a preceptor at the end of the week, and if you had them write their journal of what they learned that week, that's a very successful way to get them to conceptualize what they're doing. And then at the end of the quarter, they're going to be able to reflect upon what they learned within the healthcare system. So I would recommend that. Their bear does have spots. There are columns in it that they can write up what they learned throughout their rotations. And they also write up, again, the executive summary from their portfolio. If you guys have opportunities for them to train in the local area, that would be great. So if they can go to other organizations, that's fantastic. If they go to national conferences, that's another huge way to develop their competencies. So and we can absolutely help you all to develop your curriculum for them while they're at their residency site. Okay, so I wanted to just share this with you. Again, this kind of brings back this competency development. So in terms of the learning, If you have them now work on a project, now they're demonstrating the approach of those, or the use of those tools. Now they're actually demonstrating it. They have to actually be able to assess using the right maybe methodology, and then implement a strategy. A lot of them will actually get to that phase of change where they're actually implementing the change and they can see their results over time. And then they have to write up the executive summary for these types of projects. So in terms of competency development, this is a tremendous way to get them to really rise to the higher levels of competency development. All right, so this is, I mentioned this. This is another tab in the Bear. So the Bear is an Excel spreadsheet. This tab, what it shows is these are all the different, these are the 7 domains, and these are all the different competency areas of the 35 competencies. What this shows is this is essentially just a summary of where they went, and then this is part of their rotations, and then they'll assess what they learned in terms of competency development. They'll be able to assess what their competency level is after they went to that area. And so again, if you are identifying that they're weak and maybe in the healthcare law, you can have them go meet with the medical executive committee. Maybe they're focusing on the medical staff bylaws. Again, that gives them great exposure, and then they can come back and start to adjust their competencies with regards to that area. Are there any questions on this? It's, again, a great tool just to track what they're doing and how they're developing competencies over time.
Can I just make a quick point?
Sure.
So for those that haven't worked with the tool,
So all those cells are conditionally formatted. So as a student puts in a number in there, it's going to change a certain color, and it'll stay black if there's nothing in it. So just as a quick reference guide, as the student goes through the residency, you'll get a quick visualization of how they're doing in their competencies. So if you have certain areas that are consistently black, that's kind of your cue to say, hey, you haven't touched upon this particular competency. Maybe you should rotate in this area, or maybe I should give you a project. So again, it becomes a visual tool. It's very busy to see on the screen, but as you go through it, it should give you some cues as you go through.
Yeah, and so what Forrest is saying is down here there's a summation of what their, or averages is that correct? Yeah, and at the end of the at the end of the residency year, the students will have to go and do their final self-assessment at the bottom, and then you'll also go in and do your final self-assessment at the bottom. And so you'll have a chance to kind of look to see what the body of work that they have and do your final assessment with them. So this, again, this probably shouldn't wait until the end. You should use this tool over time and use it effectively to say, we need to work on these competency areas and I need you to start doing these rotations. All right. So just some final recommendations. I covered several of these already. Make sure you ask them for their bear. Use the tool to help develop their residency rotations. Make sure you're assessing where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are. What I typically see is a lot of clinicians that may come out of, say, primary care, they may be a primary care provider, will not want to go back into primary care. And so I tell them, no, you need to go back, but look at it from a different lens. You need to look at it from a managerial standpoint or a leadership standpoint, because they're going to get different competencies with regards to that. So please make sure they get out into areas that they're familiar with. It may be a shortened rotation, but they still need to kind of look at it from a different lens. Make sure that you're assessing you're using the projects to balance their competencies and develop them. They should put no more than 5 competency areas in any one project. And you guys can help to kind of broaden their aperture, if you will, or the range of what they're working on. Make sure that you look at the GEMC curriculum guide. Again, it'll help you to just kind of get a feel for what the specific competency requirements, and then balance those residency rotations with the projects. Do you guys have any questions? I know we covered a lot. But this is, again, our conversation starts today, essentially. Your advisors, you should be working with an advisor from the faculty. They're truly there to help kind of bridge the gap for both the Bear and the portfolio projects. So you don't have to be an expert in your portfolio projects on your end. As long as you can get them the opportunity to open the doors, they can start working with the experts. As an example, you can push them into the quality management areas. They can start working with those quality management experts. On our end, the faculty can help you to kind of shape their portfolio projects if they're deficient in any areas. They'll help you to kind of make sure that it's a sound portfolio project that's at a graduate level. So it should be a team approach to this competency development. All right? So we're on break? Okay.